is 5:30. Call to order the West Fargo Planning and Zoning meeting for Tuesday, November 12th. Item B, the approval of the order of the agenda. It's been moved and seconded to approve the order of the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The agenda is approved. Next item, approval of the minutes from October 8th, 2024.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as produced or published online. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. And it's approved. So move to the regular agenda. Item 1 is A24-29 Gateway West First Edition, a request for approval of a planned unit development, detailed development plan at 1950 Cheyenne Street, Lot 8, Block 1 of Gateway West First Edition.
Thank you. The applicant has submitted detailed development plans, including a site plan, elevations, building plans, landscaping, and signage for proposed financial institute near Hornbachers on Cheyenne Street. When the property was platted and zoned in 2018, detailed development plans and the project narrative established development
You
patterns.
getting some feedback there? There you go. Maybe pull it towards your face.
Established development patterns for general, commercial, and retail land uses. The previous land use identified for this lot was a 4,000 square foot restaurant with a drive-through and 54 parking spaces. The revised detailed development plans show a 2,980 square foot financial institution with a drive-through and 14 parking spaces, which exceeds the minimum parking requirements for a bank or financial institution, decreasing the building footprint and increasing the amount of green space for the property. Earlier this year, a section of the fence along the buffer/trail easement was knocked over. This was which is a requirement of the PUD and will need to be replaced by the property owner. The applicant has been notified regarding this and has indicated they've reached out to the developer to address this issue. A building permit may be issued so as long as the fence repair is specifically included as part of the building project. Under the recently approved PUD ordinance, a PUD detailed development plan may be approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission if it is determined by the Commission to be in substantial compliance with the approved PUD concept plan. The criteria is listed in the staff report. No concerns were noted in terms of the review criteria. It is recommended that the city approve the proposed application on the basis it is consistent with city plans and ordinances. This is not a public hearing. I'm available to answer any questions, as is the applicant.
Okay, thank you. So this is the detailed plan for a previous PUD that is a little different than what was originally submitted, but within the same parameters.
Yes.
Basically. And that's why it's not public, because it's just the detailed plan.
Correct.
Got it.
I can go over the criteria if you want, but basically they've decreased the footprint, increased the green space. Doesn't appear to be as.
And it's just a different kind of business. Instead of a restaurant, it's a bank, I assume.
Yes.
Because we need more banks. That was my outside voice. Okay. Commissioners, any questions? If there's no questions, I have none. I would take a motion.
Move to approve the concept as presented with
The detailed development plans.
the detailed development plan, yes.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the detailed development plan for the PUD. Any discussion, further discussion required before vote? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Motion passed. Item 2, this is a public hearing. A24-30. Meadow Ridge 18th edition, a request for approval of a replot and a planned unit development at 2345 and 2355 Meadow Ridge Parkway, lots 1 and 2, block 1 of Meadow Ridge, 15th edition.
Greetings. I'm Leslie McGillivray-Rivas, Senior Planner at City of West Fargo. So the purpose we are at with the Perry Center, you might remember that it is existing PUD. The purpose of being here today is to reestablish its zoning district under our new PUD standards. They're seeking the designation of the underlying base zoning district being the R3 standard. And in addition, a retracement plat has been requested, which would eliminate a centrally located lot line, which prevents expansion of the building. So
One question.
Yes.
When the last PUD was done, or last version of the PUD was done, was there any underlying zoning established, or was it R2 before?
Let me
Or
go back to by
was
the
it
way
just
of
a
the history.
PUD?
So there were a couple of, there was a couple of different ways to look at this. It wasn't specifically a baseline zoning district, but there was a myriad of approved uses. So one of
Right,
the
I read the history, it was kind of long.
Right, so one of the approved uses, they were for office and a myriad of other things, and I've got the applicant here who can maybe speak to the evolution of the office types that did occupy that. Most of them were in support of the mission of the Perry Center, Inc., so it has evolved from office use to residential and so on and so forth. This proposal consolidates the mission of the Perry Center, Inc. to have the supportive offices, which would be affiliated with the residential component of the maternity.
But I was just, do you recall what the baseline
I sure don't.
zoning was, the
It-
last, with the building that's there now that is going to be replaced or
I
expanded
don't
on?
have the access to that, tell you the truth.
Because that was one thing I couldn't really follow in the,
Yep, so there was, the underlying land use was medium-density residential, according to this. Let's see if we can move that, make that better.
is that me doing that?
I think it's just too close there. So, and then back in 1995, it was rezoned from light commercial to planned unit development. So there has always been sort of a nod to the office, but also a residential component along with it.
And it's got that weird thing with the easement underneath for the
Mhm.
gas line, right, or something like that?
Correct.
That restricts where the building can be.
Yep. So let's go through, since we're jumping right into the questions, I think I'm just gonna go right to the PowerPoint. So, general location of the site is right alongside the jurisdiction between Fargo and West Fargo in this location, this little notch into our city boundaries. The site in question that we're speaking right here is the subject property, which is currently 2 individual lots. Within the Perry Center organization, they do own the lot to the south as well. The project currently has 2 standalone buildings, single story with a large sort of like structural roof line, which are here and here. The south building is affiliated with the uses, has some residential, but mostly is utilized by a daycare and other uses, but that is not part of this application, so I want to make that clear. We are focusing specifically on these 2 lots where the expansion is planned. Okay? The proposed lot increase, or the proposed project, they have submitted both a concept plan and a detailed development plan for the purpose of an expedited approval process in addition to the retracement plat, with the aspiration to hopefully still break ground yet this year. The project will be completed in 2 phases. Phase 1 on this northeast, or I guess northwest corner, would be the first phase of construction, which will allow the other building to stand until the second phase it proceeds, which allows the 2 buildings to be joined and everything housed under one roof. So the second story is primarily the residential units with the bedrooms with some communal living spaces for the residents. And then the first level has a component of some office in the front that comes into the front door, and then also the joined communal kitchen and other service areas that the residents, in addition to some other bedrooms. So the considerations for the PUD amendment, as I mentioned, the R3 being the underlying zoning district. So the social service use, it's permitted by right under the R3 zoning district. The retracement plat is required because otherwise the building would be crossing parcel boundaries, which is not allowed. And so there is that. The grid in your packet goes through all of the zoning standards very specifically, which any building permit application will fulfill. There is only 2 that do not meet the R3 standards, and those specifically are the parking and the rear yard setback. While the intention is for the demolition to reuse the foundation, and the architect is here who can speak to that, it was found that it was constructed a little closer than was previously known to the property line. So there is a minimum standard for the R3 zone of 25 feet. However, currently, as it currently exists, the measurement was about 23.85. So we're suggesting 23 feet to give them a little wiggle room in the construction standard as they not being objectionable. And because they're,
It's just at those corners, though.
yep, just right here is where it pinches a little bit. So other standards in the R3 zone or in our zoning ordinance that are just for your information. As mentioned, there is a very large 65-foot wide gas line easement that exists in this property, which kind of illustrates to you why this site is constrained a little bit in its arrangement and limited. So this is quite a creative reuse of the property. We found that there are existing boulevard trees as required by ordinance where they are allowed to be planted. Of course, they cannot be conflicting with the gas line. In speaking with the city forester, there is a requirement for additional boulevard trees, which the applicant has agreed to supply to meet that boulevard tree standard. Now, also, as I mentioned before, there is the property to the south, which has a daycare use. So there is a 6-foot vinyl fence that falls in this location within this lot. Now, because this is a PUD, we have to, itemize the things that are for the function. So the overlay zone would typically say you cannot have a fence in this location. However, it's integral to the use of the daycare and functioning as such. So we are
But the daycare is on the other property.
on the other property.
So they're actually utilizing that space for the other building's function?
Correct. So it's an expansion of the play yard, which staff felt was a reasonable request since they are the same property owners adjoining predominantly. So also just to point out, there is an existing garage on the site that has a function of parking and storage and a little shed that shares as well.
Interesting. How would that be handled if they sold that portion of it and maintained?
That would be a question for the applicant. I mean,
Well, I mean, how would the city approach that? Because that's okay, a deviation, it's in the PUD then spelled out.
so you're saying if the south property sold or the north property sold, then.
Yeah, if they're no longer, friends.
Well, it's not a requirement to keep the fence, let's put it that way. The allowance of it being there as a function of being an integral part of the daycare allows it to remain. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be removed in the future.
In that existing shed there that goes across property lines too?
That is correct.
That's kind of, I don't know.
Right?
Creates entanglements.
Yep. So the applicants are present. Nathaniel Douglas, representing the Perry Center, and the architect and project manager, Red Fisness, and Dylan Neurer. So if you would like them to come up and have any questions for them or for myself, I'm sure they'd be happy to speak to the matter in greater detail as far as their operations, should you have any questions or any of the design details.
Okay. Well, this is a public hearing, so if there's anybody that, from the public, that wishes to comment or input on this at this time, we'll open that up. Okay, seeing none, we'll close that. Yeah, it's, I mean, just, you know, two questions for me, just to bounce this around, is there's a pretty big deviation on the parking requirements from the standard associated with the R3, I believe. It was what's the R3 requirement? It was,
One for bedroom,
and
There are
we're
three.
going for .25 per bedroom?
.75 per bedroom.
.75.
Yep, so a 25% reduction. So, and I should also point out, if I didn't before, I apologize for admitting that, but because they are within proximity, within 500 feet of a bus stop, just by that circumstance alone, they're allowed to reduce their
10%.
parking requirement by 10%. So in addition, the documentation from the applicant in not only this application, but the previous one to their residential component, did document that the residents typically don't have access to their own personal vehicle. In addition, because it's supportive social service use, there is transportation an option provided for specific uses by the center themselves. So they haven't found it to be in any way a problem to have less than the required number of stalls, and they can speak to that specifically if you have questions.
Well, okay, then a question for you
Mhm.
first. And I'm sorry if I'm domineering here, chime in if you want. Again, the question of, well, it sells, changes function. They leave the building as it is. It goes from a social services function to just, you know, an apartment
Mhm.
with 20 or 34 beds. And the requirements for parking would change
Well, let's look at it this
if
way.
the use changes?
So adapt to reuse, right? That is a consideration that staff had. What happens should this be something other than a maternity home? What if it's another group, communal living setting, I would call it? Is there a similar
Man
need or
camp.
want, right? So because this is specific to social services, there could be some overlap, and it might just be building permitting internal configurations that we would have to look at, but more than likely it would have to come before another PUD amendment for consideration. And there would have,
If the use changes?
if they're going to be reorganizing the interior of the building to,
They don't change a thing, they just change the use. A different owner?
I would say
Say,
that is
one
a
of the
very, I
construction
might have Aaron
companies in town buys it to use it for their seasonal workers. Each of them has a pickup truck, 34 pickup trucks. I'm just trying to understand,
right, so
is
that's,
there a trigger then that would change with the change in use?
so specific to that, that would be that would be different than a treatment or a supportive living communal use center. So you're talking about more rental or seasonal use, something more of a hotel or something like that. So that to me would be cause for a change of use application to the PUD, where we would have to take that into consideration and look at the request and the stress on parking, and see how that standard could be met in the future. And it might trigger the lessened ability based on having to have less bedrooms based on the parking on site.
Okay. So you're saying, or I heard, yes, change of ownership with a change of use would trigger some
Depending on the change of use.
action
Yeah.
for the city to change its, essentially, its zoning, PUD.
That's what I would think. Yep.
If I could just chime in.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. I would say, I think I hear what your concern is in regards to the parking, and so I think what would be most appropriate here is that if the commissioner, Planning and Zoning Commission is comfortable with the reduced, kind of that 0.75 ratio for this specific use, we could tie that parking ratio specifically to this type of community service type use. Because it is possible that it could change someday into a different type of community service, that maybe those, users do have more cars, and the
Right.
city would like to review, the parking ratio at that time. And so we can certainly build that into the PUD if that's the concern.
Okay, I would have a question how to do that, but then I have a follow-up question to that first one. It's like, one of the things that was cited in the report was, hey, historically, the folks that have been cared for there or provided support don't have cars. How many beds are they going from and to? And do they have any sort of track record on how many cars have been, parking spots they've used,
I believe
roughly?
they do. So there are 9 currently. They're going to 34.
So tripling, roughly.
Yep.
And how many cars have they had, how many spots did they have before?
The same amount. And the request there was for much less. But also remember that half of that other building was more affiliated
Same
with.
amount per room, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
The other half of that was dedicated to office space, and the customers coming into a real estate office and other types of offices that went to them as a destination.
Is the office portion expanding also?
The office portion is 1,414 square feet. So it's a small, modest amount of the first floor, but it is designated to service the social services. It would be difficult, not impossible, but it's intended to support the organization and not as a standalone.
They've been there for several years. Based on the number of rooms, 0.75 has served it well. It hasn't been an issue.
It has
So
been an issue.
keeping that ratio for the more rooms,
Mhm.
adding parking spots, but, okay, got it. So it should work for this use.
And I would say, based on the document that I saw from the previous application and what they're requesting now, that I don't expect it to be exceeded or at maxed at any time. It just doesn't appear that that's the intention, so.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Aaron, you mentioned, we can make it a part of the PUD. How could we make it a part of the PUD?
So as part of after the PUD ordinance amendment that the city approved not too long ago, going forward, with all PUDs, we're going to be documenting those PUDs in an actual ordinance. And so that ordinance will document the zone change to PUD zoning district. It'll identify the baseline zoning district, and then it will identify every modification or deviation from those baseline standards, including parking. And so within the ordinance, we can specify that the parking ratio used for this PUD is specific to this specific type of social service use, and we'll have to kind of figure out the wording of that. But in terms of kind of the
Add
maternity,
that to the ordinance.
Mhm.
and that'll be in the ordinance, yes. Yep.
So we're not giving a variance, we're just putting this into the PUD
Mhm.
with a stipulation that any use changes, that has to come back to this.
Right.
So in case someone wanted to put a greenhouse here or something. That's all I'm gonna talk.
That was a long
That
night.
might have been a date.
That was 4 months ago. Come on.
But, right, so we would, in the form of a motion, say that any changes to this use would have to come from this.
Well, that's already part of what the ordinance will encourage. So what we're asking you today is to approve the concept plan and detailed development plan and retracement plat as we feel, as it's been written, to meet the standard, simply that. and then take what you've said into consideration as we bring the ordinance to the commission next week.
Yes, sir.
And if I may clarify a little bit in terms of the change in use. The social service use is permitted by right in the R3 zoning district, and so it's not necessarily that a change of use would require it to come back for further approval, but it is any change in use that would be different in terms of the number of parking requirements. That's what would trigger it to come back for approval, assuming they would need some type of parking accommodation. Or they would need to, potentially expand their parking lot, in which case they'd be coming back for a detailed development plan modification, for example.
May I ask one other clarifying question?
Sure.
Why don't we just go to a R3? Is it because of those exceptions?
Yes.
So
Well, the R3
if we did R3, we would have to do variances to the zone for the offsets at the corners and the parking, and I think there was something else. And the fence.
So because it was a PUD prior,
Yes.
we're reestablishing the PUD. So to your point, could this go back to simply an R3 standard? Possibly, but then you're right, we would be asking for the same concessions and variances, and that's the flexibility that the PUD allows.
I'm just asking for clarification.
Yep.
I'm not suggesting. I just want to make sure I'm clear.
But-
It's essentially those couple of
Right,
deviations from that full standard.
right. And to tag off of what Aaron said, so I'm sitting here with the R3 district standards, so the permitted uses in the R3 are any of the permitted uses in the R2 district. That's how our ordinance reads. Multiple dwellings containing more than 8 units, social service uses such as drug treatment centers, homeless shelters, shelters for victims of domestic abuse. So we have some language that is very specific and a little tight for something has been established as a PUD, so that when we're calling it social services, it is supportive housing, and that's how we're looking at it. The conditionally permitted uses in the R2 are convenience establishments. So it kind of goes in many different directions for the commercial standards, but when you're talking about a diametrically different use, that I think you're suggesting, it's like that would be a whole different, probably baseline zoning district standard.
And this property does have a strange feature of the pipeline, and it really restricts the configuration of building on that space, so there's a pretty strong need for utilizing PUDs
Mhm.
in order to enable something
Yep,
reasonable.
exactly. Any
I
other?
just don't want to use PUD because it's convenient, that's all.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
seems like that fits there.
Did you want to hear from anybody else? Any other questions?
I'm questioned out, actually, so I'm pretty good, but I don't want to speak for anybody else.
Will there be any expansion in the services that are provided, or is it really just scaling it up from 9 beds to 34?
That's an operations question. I will, if you don't mind, I'll bring up our applicant, if you wouldn't mind, Nathan, stepping up and addressing that question.
You are?
I'm Nate Douglas. I'm the executive director for the Perry Center. Can you repeat the question again?
Will there be an expansion in the services that you're providing, or is it just going to be scaling up what you're already doing?
It will be scaling up for the most part. That increases some of the education classes that we're doing and some of the counseling pieces that we're doing as well. So everything kind of just grows, but mainly starts with the bedrooms, yeah.
Okay, but there won't be any new services or new reasons that people would be coming
No,
to your
no,
building?
it would stay the same.
Okay.
Just another operational question since you're here.
Yeah.
The folks that you're helping out, are they typically there long-term, or is it, a couple months, or is it?
So our program is designed to be long-term. So I let residents know that their stay is indefinite. I know that seems like a big, scary word, But whatever it takes for them to be successful, and that takes time, that takes investment. So we'll see some residents stay with us sometimes even a year after baby. Just really depends on their situation. So our average length of stay right now is somewhere around like 190 days per resident. Yeah.
Just curious. how-
Yeah, absolutely. Our goal is long-term. There's a lot of short-term programs, but sometimes they can be kind of a Band-Aid to a gaping wound. So we're really trying to just press into being a long-term program.
Is the daycare, and I know that's not part of what we're talking about today, but is the daycare for other children that the residents have, or what's the?
So it is for our residents and their babies and other children. We have about 20% from the community, but that number is going to go down even more as we are growing to 33 bedrooms. It will be exclusive to Perry Center residents by the end of 2025.
Thanks for what you do.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay. Any other questions? Accept the motion.
We're still in the public hearing.
I closed that.
We did.
Did I not?
It was so long ago, I don't remember.
And then I kept asking questions. Go figure.
I will move to approve as presented.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the replat and UD at the newly created plot as presented. Were there other, and conditions listed in the recommendation? No. Any further discussion or debate required before vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passed. Okay, are there any non-agenda items to discuss? Last item, adjourn from the regular agenda.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Wait. Aha. Thanks, guys. It was an interesting, the thing there, the only thing that makes me a little worried about this, using the PUDs, is kind of painting yourself in a corner when it gets sold. When something changes,